Let's continue then with our focus on the upcoming elections. There's been mixed reactions on the IEC's decision to reopen the candidate registrations for the upcoming local government elections. Let's get more reaction then from Professor Barry Hanyane. It's a pleasure to see you, Prof. Thanks so very much for availing yourself to SABc News, sir.
Much appreciated. A very good afternoon to your viewers.
Prof, you've no doubt been keeping a close watch on the goings-on the last few days. Your take, please, on the IEC's plans in preparation of the upcoming elections, having lost their bid to have the elections postponed.
Yeah, I think the IEC tiptoed somewhat very careful on the judgment that we saw last week Friday, and in a sense tried to steer away from issues that may otherwise could have provoked ill feelings from various political parties, especially when it comes to the issue of party lists, which from the onset was somewhat of a controversial issue, which indeed, as things stood last week, it was putting the governing party in a very disadvantaged position. But then, of course, there was the opposition parties who claimed that the IECs should trade very carefully and should not be seen to be favoring the interests of the governing party. And that balance seems to be very precarious as things stand. We now know that the DA has an appetite to take the matter forward and seek some kind of relief in our courts of law.
And speaking of opposition parties, and of course you mentioned it briefly, the political parties have weighed in, some threatening legal action and indeed questioning the credibility of the IEC, especially in relation to the reopening of the candidate registration. Well, the IEC said, well, this is a direct consequence of what's transpired. The fact that we are now carrying on with those elections means that legally they would have had to reopen the candidate list. On the back of that, what do you think would be, the DA, for instance, who have said that they are willing to take this to court? How would they fare in court, given the fact that the IEC is saying we've done nothing illegal here? Yeah,
I think we've got to separate what is legal and what is an administrative mandate. A schedule was published, a schedule was undertaken, and for some reason, there were attempts to seek court clarity on various fronts, amongst others, the issue of the date, which was controversial, and caught the attention of all and sundry. But what worries me the most is that you had a schedule already that was opened and closed, and you want to go back. And this was at a time when a party, a governing party, was at a disadvantage. I'm worried about the public perception. It may be that in answering your question directly, we will then have to seek a much more clarity from the legal experts. But again, I think it's important we separate legal imperatives versus administrative imperatives.
Okay, and just talking about that administrative imperatives, you said we're separating the two. So going on to what you're saying, just yesterday I was getting some reaction from opposition political parties, and just very interestingly, when I was talking to the IFP says this is actually nothing new. In fact, they've benefited from the IEC reopening the issue of candidate lists. So they can't say, which they'd said before, in the briefing yesterday, the IEC itself said we cannot reopen on an ad hoc basis, but the IFP says it seems that the IEC is doing as it pleases and changes the rules as and when. And I wonder how that then looks, and it puts into question exactly what you're saying, in that the IEC might look not to be as clean as we've always considered the IEC to be, because the IFP says we've benefited from them reopening. So this is not a new thing.
Yeah, but Flo, again, we've got to trade very carefully here. I think the IEC is aware that they can risk what we would call your public opinion prosecution.
Yeah.
The damage there might be minimal. people won't necessarily go for what I would call the bone of legitimacy. But then again, it depends largely on whether opposition parties would want to stretch the matter forward.
Yeah.
In the case of the DA, this is the litmus test that the IEC has to go through. If they have it their way, they will then obviously challenge indirectly the legitimacy, but more so the issue of party list. Because remember, if the sanctions stood, opposition parties were standing to gain, because a lot of these words would then be surrendered to them without much contestation, which is very fierce, by the way, coming from the ANC.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk about then the readiness of the country to actually then hold those elections. Of course, the IEC had been hoping that the elections would be postponed. That application was indeed then dismissed by the Constitutional Court. So another question, on the back of all of this, I'd also want to talk about the Moseneke report. I mean, the Moseneke report clearly stated that we should not go ahead with the elections this year and that the elections should rather be held next year. Was that a futile exercise? The IEC responded to that yesterday, saying that, well, it helped them to weigh up issues and to see, where they stand when it comes to the constitutional rights of people, weighing up, the fact that we're still in this pandemic and people's right to life and so forth. I'm interested to hear what your views really are on this. I mean, no doubt money was spent on this report, and now for us to kind of go, oh, well, we continue with those elections anyway.
True.
Yeah.
Flo, I'm in an academic institution. I'll always be biased towards that, so please bear with me. Obviously, this is for academic purpose. There's no doubt about it right now as things stand. I'm even tempted to go as far as being cruel and suggest, well, just shelve it. It can't be. It can't be. I think that would be extremely, extremely cruel. But the purpose now, which is repurposing, is to suggest that this has now become an academic exercise, and a good one for that matter, because for the first time in the history of this country, post-1994, we were able to bring on board the scientific community. We were able to respond to circumstances of the day, and that is, of course, the prevalence of a pandemic. And in a way, custom purpose a response that would be local government elections in 2022, somewhere in February. But then the Constitutional Court had other means to respond to this. So the next question we need to ask ourselves, the state of readiness of the IEC, and then, of course, the individual parties themselves. It's easy to say the ANC stands to benefit when at the same time we now know that things are not going well into the House. And perhaps it's not them alone, it's other smaller parties, including independent candidates, who are struggling to reach out to their potential constituencies.
All right, Prof, it's been a pleasure having you with us. I wish we had longer time there, but we'll certainly catch up with you as we slowly head to the polls. Thanks very much for giving us your time.
I appreciate it.